In this next group of videos, I want to talk about the topic of group policy. Now, group policy is a fundamental part of the management of a Windows Server domain, and especially in Windows Server 2008, this thing just continues to grow and get more and more capabilities. So I want to start off with a very simple visual of exactly what group policy is. Okay, group policy was designed to help us manage massive amounts of users in a number of domains. This can be trees, forests, whatever. And group policy is fundamental. You've got to get your head around group policy. Okay, now it's very simple on one hand, and it can get very complex on the other, and you'll see what I'm talking about as we go through these. Okay, so in the next few videos I want to do this little animation about group policy, give you a visual that you can kind of always keep in your head about what's going on with the various pieces and parts, and then we'll talk about how to manage it and go through the administrative tool and take a look at creating a group policy object and so forth. So let's start off with exactly what is group policy. So you have a domain here, and it's represented by the triangle, and in this domain you'll notice we have 3 domain controllers. We have 3 user computers, and we've put those into an organizational unit, if you remember that, if you've watched the Active Directory videos already. Now, by putting these 3 users in an organizational unit, we can administer them as a group, and so we've got another organizational unit with 3 other users over here, and we'll call this one over here sales and this one accounting. Okay, well, the idea with group policy is we know that, for example, the accounting group has certain things that we want to apply to every one of their machines. Well, the easy way to do that is through group policy. We also know that we have standard security requirements for the entire domain, so anytime anybody in this domain logs on, we want to apply those changes to them. Well, the answer is group policy. What we're going to do, and I want you just to picture, if you will, just a text file with a bunch of instructions. Don't show the run box. Don't show, various parts of the properties dialog when you right click on the desktop, because we don't want users to change the resolution on their monitors and that sort of thing. Okay, and so we can fix it to where, for example, when these users log in, they click start and they want to click the run command, and they want to execute a command from that run box. Well, we can prevent that run box from even showing up, and this prevents users from inadvertently breaking something on their computer that causes a trouble call and a lot of hassle and downtime for them. So we're going to just create a list of the settings that we want in a group policy object, and that's what this is. This is a group policy object, and then we can apply that group policy object to the domain. And that means anybody who's a member of this domain who logs in is going to receive all the settings in this group policy. Pretty cool, huh? Now, what makes it even better is we can apply settings from a group policy object to an organizational unit. Now, in this example, it looks like we've applied the same group policy object to the domain and to the OU. You would never do that in real life. What you would do is have a separate group policy that we can apply to a particular OU. Then let's say that sales has a couple of other changes, a couple of other unique settings that we'd like to apply. So we'd create a third group policy object and apply it to the sales OU. Okay? Now you can actually go down to the user level and computers and apply group policies to individual users and I'm sorry, not computers, but groups, our groups that we set up. So you can see you have a lot of power here, and you can get a lot of work done really quickly by thinking through your group policy. And what Microsoft recommends is don't go over, say, 5 to 7 group policies, because what a lot of companies will do, they will apply all the settings that everybody in the domain needs. They will apply to a domain GPO. Then they will apply specific GPO for specific changes to the various OUs, and then maybe even break down and apply 1 or 2 more to specific groups, and sometimes even users. Although you can tell now, if you start applying these to individual users, it's going to get really complicated really quick, because these group policies kind of stack up on top of each other and they'll start to overwrite each other. Also, as you apply group policies, these get applied on the login. So when the user logs in, the operating system begins to apply these group policies. And if you have a lot of group policies to apply, then login is going to slow down considerably, okay? And so you just want to be careful with that. So group policy, it is incredible for its simplicity, but can also get quite intimidating with its complexity if you're not very careful, okay? So let's go over our terms real quickly. This is a group policy object. Now, I'm going to create a group policy object, or I'm going to edit a group policy object in the group policy management tool. And I will show you that in a different video. But that's a good overview of group policy. If you can get this picture in your head, you'll be able to deal with group policy a whole lot better. I've saved this for the last because I didn't want to confuse you. But if you go back and watch some of the Active Directory videos, you remember sites. And a site was where we could basically kind of segregate off groups of domains, and a site can even cross domains based on the network connectivity. We can apply group policy objects to sites just like we can OUs and domains. Okay, so that's a good visual overview of group policy. Hope it helps. Let's jump into group policy and look at just the basics that you need to know and understand. First of all, group policy is really a settings manager for Active Directory. And in a different video, I did a visual animation about group policy. And if you haven't watched that, I would suggest you might want to go take a look at that one. It's entitled, What is Group Policy? But this is really a settings manager for Active Directory. We're going to make a list of settings, and we're going to create them once in a file, and then we're going to apply that file many times to many different objects. And so we're going to take care of a whole lot of settings really quickly. Now, what can you do with group policy? What exactly does it manage? Well, as it turns out, the better question is, what does it not manage? It's an easier way to answer that. You can handle registry policies, security policies, and by these two we mean things that are set and handled in the registry. Security policies like how big or how complex does the password need to be, how many times can you reuse it, how old can it get before you have to reset it, all that sort of thing. Internet Explorer settings, we can hide things from the user, we can set home pages, we can do all kinds of things with Internet Explorer, which is huge because so many of our apps now are delivered through the browser. One of the real cool ones is the software deployment policies. We can have a user automatically get certain software installed to their client machine when they log in based on their membership in certain organizational units or groups or so forth. This is a really cool function about group policy. And there's a couple of ways to do this. And you'll have to read about group policy to get into that. I don't know if we'll go that deep. And then there's the automation, and by that we mean scripts. And there's two types of administrators out there, those that want to do everything with a script and those that never use scripts. And I would strongly recommend that you take a look at some of the scripting functionalities in Windows Server 2008. We'll actually talk about those later in a different video. But you can get a lot of things done with scripting in these operating systems, and group policy makes it very, very easy to apply these to certain users. And then there's redirection, and by that we mean basically folder redirection, that the users save things into their My Documents folder on their local machine, but in reality every bit of that traffic's being redirected out to a server. It greatly simplifies the user's life, and it makes it possible for us to store everything out on the server and to back it up consistently and all that sort of thing. Now, the basics or the fundamental of a group policy implementation is the group policy object, and this is just a single file, if you will, that's a collection of settings, and these settings can be applied to Active Directory sites, domains, organizational units, groups, and even users. So there's almost no limit as to what you can do with these things, and be very careful, because while there's almost no limit as to what you can do with them, there is precisely almost no limit as to what you can do with them, and they can get really complex on you really quickly. We can also apply these to computers, and a lot of potential here. And we're going to manage every bit of this through the Group Policy Manager, which we're going to go into in the next video or two. I'm going to step you through the Group Policy Manager, editing a GPO, creating a new GPO, and show you how you can tie it to certain groups and users and that sort of thing. So we'll take a look at that stuff in a different video. Let's step through managing group policy, and I just want to take you through the administrative tool. Okay, this may not be very slick or pretty because I'm just going to step you through it as we go, but we'll look at it together and I'll show you some of the kind of the ins and outs and how this thing thinks and behaves and so forth. So you'll actually be able to see it and get some kind of hands-on, I guess. First thing we want to do is from the desktop of the server, we're going to click on Start and we're going to go into Administrative Tools. Now when this pop-up appears, you're going to notice there is a Group Policy Management tool. Okay, and we are going to click on the Group Policy Management tool and it opens it up, and I'm going to make it full screen, and I'm in kind of low resolution to do this video, so it'll get a little crowded here, but just bear with me. Notice yours is probably going to open up something like this, and if you will notice, this sees my forest and my domain, which is Nashville, Tennessee. And if I click on the little plus sign beside that, it will open it up and I can see my domains and my sites. Now, I don't really have a site. I didn't set up a site, but the tool's still there. If I expand domains, it sees my Nashville TN domain. And if I expand that, you will notice there's a default domain policy. And if I click on that, it's telling me that I've selected a link to a group policy object, okay, and it's warning me that any changes I make here are global to the group policy object and it will impact all other locations where this is linked. Well, this thing's pointed to my domain, so if you'll notice, if I click on that, notice the scope of this. My default domain policy, it's attached to the Nashville, Tennessee domain. Now in a different video I did that animation, and if you remember when it pointed to the big triangle and the triangle turned yellow, that's exactly what we've done here. We've attached this to that domain. Now notice we can do security filters, and so we can apply it to the following groups: users and computers, and we're applying it to authenticated users as well. Don't worry about WMI filtering, we'll get to that later on. If I go to the Details tab, this tells me who created it, what date they created it, okay, whether it's enabled. We can disable all settings, okay. We can also enable or disable the computer configuration and user configuration, and we'll get into that a little bit later as well. The settings, now it's going to generate a report here and show me the settings that this group policy has inflicted or enforced, I guess is a better term, on the domain. Notice if I click Show All, it will show them to me. And on the account policies password for the domain, there are 24 passwords remembered. My maximum age is 42 days. The minimum age is 1 day. The minimum length is 7 characters. They have to meet complexity requirements, and it kind of goes on and on and on, and you'll see some more. There's account policies, Kerberos policy. You see some security options here. There's a lot of things going on, so you can set all these things through group policy, okay? And then delegation is where we can set delegations that have permission for this GPO, the group policy object, to edit it, apply it, and link it, and that sort of thing. Now that's the default domain policy, it's there. Now if we expand our domain controllers, you'll notice that there is also a default domain controllers policy. And this is telling me this one's real. So if I click on Details, I get the same type of information. If I click on Settings, I can see, okay, what are we doing to our domain controllers? Okay, so notice right now I have 2 policies in place for this domain. I've got one at the domain level, and then I've got one at the domain controllers level. Okay, and at the domain controllers you can see all the things that have been set, everybody who has permissions, various things. Okay, so you can go through here and look at this. Alright, now in the next video we're going to create our own group policy object. Okay, so I'll see you there. Now in the previous video we talked about the basics of the group policy management tool. What I want to do now is talk to you about how do I create a group policy object that I want to begin to apply. Now let me tell you something, this is something that you need to whiteboard quite a bit, and you need to get a few people involved. I've done some consulting with some rather large corporations, and I've seen these guys take months, 6-8 months, to get their group policy structure laid out across the entire nationwide organization, because you don't want to have a whole lot of these group policy objects being laid on top of each other. So notice in our organization right now we already have two. If you remember from that video, we've got the default domain policy, and then we've got a default domain controllers policy that's being applied. Let's talk about in this video how we create our own group policy object. Notice if we click on group policy objects, this will show you all the group policy objects that are out there. You can see we have our default domain controllers policy. Let me slide this over so you can see it. Then there's our default domain policy, and then there's a new group policy object out here. Okay, well, let's create another new group policy object. I'm going to right click on group policy objects over here on the left side, and I'm just going to say new. Now notice something. It's going to say, okay, what do you want to call this? Well, we're going to call this the VTC class object. We would normally name this after maybe the OU we're going to drop it onto, or the user group that we're going to drop it onto. And then notice the source, the starter GPO. If you have a group policy out there that has kind of some basic settings, you can point to that and it'll copy those in here, but I'm going to leave mine at none. And notice there's our group policy object. Now we don't have any settings on it yet, so let's put some settings on this thing. We'll right click on it, we'll click edit, and it will take us into a little different window. And I'm going to make that full screen so we can see it well. And then I want you to see the things that you can do. Now if you have access to Windows Server 2008, go get an eval copy, or if you have just access to a full copy of it, you owe it to yourself to spend some time in here looking around. There's a bunch of third-party books out there that will help you with group policy. You need to be reading up on it, but notice, I want you to just see some of the things that you can set. For example, on a computer configuration. So if I'm going to create this group policy object and apply it to the sales OU, I can say for every computer that logs on from the sales OU, I want you to, and I can start to set up software installation. Make sure they have Office 2007 and on and on and on. Look at the Windows settings. Here's our scripts that I want to start up, and on startup, notice I can add, and I can point out to the script name, and I can put parameters or switches on it. Okay, security settings. I want you to notice how many of these there are, or how many of these that exist. That's a southern term. Okay, notice under account policies we have the password policy, the account lockout. On password policy, if I double click that, I can enforce my password history, password age, minimum length, and if I double click that, I can define this policy setting and say, you know what, you have to have at least 6 characters, and I say okay, and that's part of it. Now let me move this over so you can see it. I can work on local policies, audit policies, user rights assignment, security options. Then notice event log. I can work on event log, the maximum size for all these machines. Let's kind of come on down and let's talk about network access protection. That's a big deal. Wireless network policies. Okay, I can create a new Windows Vista or an XP policy from a wireless. Look at preferences. We can go into preferences and we can set some Windows settings. Okay, notice under environment, you remember your environment, your path statements and so forth. Files, we can set things on files. We can put a new file in here and apply a policy to that. Network shares, we can set up network shares and maintain them. Control panel settings. Let me come on down through here, and I won't go through all these, but power options. We can set power options on the individual computers as they log in to whatever OU we apply this to. Okay, so we've set all these options. We can do the same thing on the user side. We'll talk about that later. And I close this out, and here's our group policy object. Okay, now I can come back here and I can say that it's enabled, and I can set all this up. Okay, and then now I'm ready to link this or to tie it to some object. So now to tie this to something, I'm going to point at it. For example, I can point to my domain, and I can right click and I can say link an existing GPO. Okay, I can also from here I can create a new organizational unit, and this is kind of cool. I can create an organizational unit called Sales, and there you see my organizational unit. So as I create OUs out in Active Directory, they'll show up here, and I can right click and I can link my group policy object to the sales group. So there you see it. So anybody in sales are going to get those settings. Okay, real quick overview of the group policy management tool and how to create and link a group policy object. Okay, in this video I want to talk about forcing group policy updates, but I also want to use this occasion to warn you about kind of the quicksand that group policy updates can put you in really quickly. I can't stress enough, you'll really need to play with group policy in a test environment if you've never used it, and I'm going to show you later on in this video at the end. I'm going to show you how to set up a really cool test environment, so it's kind of a bonus for the class, okay? But when we start talking about applying group policy updates to various things, we can apply them to groups, to users, to organizational units, and so forth. And so what I'm going to suggest is that you apply these things to organizational units, and you're going to build organizational units in Active Directory, put computers and so forth into organizational units. But anyway, bottom line, and you know, even making those remarks, if I put a bunch of administrators in a room and ask them what's the best way to do group policy, there'll probably be a fight. Everybody has their own opinion. The bottom line is you need a style. You need to think this through, and you need to understand why you're doing it. So let's take a look at forcing group policy, and I'm going to show you a common gotcha. I'm on my server right here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the administrative tools, and I'm going to go into the group policy management tool. What we're going to do is we're going to go change the default domain policy. Now I want you to notice something here, and this is a common gotcha that'll happen with group policy, is that on my default domain policy, this is being applied to all authenticated users in the domain. That includes the administrator, because I'm authenticating into the domain. And so let me show you what we're going to do here. We're going to right click on our policy and we're going to choose edit. So we're going to go in and edit this, and under the user configuration under policies, I'm going to go into administrative template. Now how did I know to go into here? Just spending a few hours on this tool, trust me. There is a ton of stuff that you can change in here, ton being a southern technical term, meaning quite a bit of stuff. In a different video, I think I pointed out there are now more than 2,400 settings that we can make through the group policy system. So I'm going to go to the Start menu and Taskbar. Notice all the things that we can change on the Start menu taskbar. Okay, well, let me back up just a minute, and I'm going to minimize this. On my particular server right here, if I click on Start, you'll notice that I can see documents, and I can click on documents and go in and see the documents. Well, what I'm going to do, and don't worry about this deal here, notice I'm going to go in and scroll down. I'm editing my group policy object, and I'm going to scroll down and say remove documents icon from the Start menu. Now the way I change this, I can either click on properties here, or I can just double click right here on the actual settings. So I will double click and I will enable that. Okay, I'll apply it and say okay, then I will close it out. Okay, then I'm going to come here and notice this is applied to authenticated users, so I'm going to close that. Now this is going to automatically be refreshed in my domain roughly every 20 minutes or so. I'm going to force it, and that's basically the main point of this video, is how do we force group policy. So I'll go to a command prompt, and what we use now is GP update. Okay, now this is different. You used to use the SEC edit with the /refresh. That was for Windows 2000. But now Windows 2003 and forward, and it's staying the same in Windows Server 2008. We use GP update. And again, anytime you're using one of these commands, always put a / and a question mark first and look at your options. And notice we can force. It reapplies all policy settings. If I don't put force, it will only apply the policy settings that have changed. Okay, and notice I can target a computer or a user because we can set policies just that way. And this is the one we're going to use, wait. This is the number of seconds to wait for the policy processing to finish. The default notice is 600 seconds. Now in English that's 5 minutes. Okay, so we don't want to wait. I can put a 0, means don't wait, which is what we're going to use, and I can put a -1, which means wait indefinitely. Okay, so I'm impatient, so we're going to go down here and we're going to call gp update /wait 0 and press enter. Now notice it's updating the policy, and it'll take it just a second. Notice my user policy update has been successfully triggered, and then my computer policy has been successfully triggered. Now, a test question gotcha. Notice I do not have to log off and back on. When I just click on Start again, notice my Documents link is gone here. Okay, so the policy got updated and it's now being enforced. But I want you to notice something. It got enforced on the administrator login and on my administrator box because I'm one of the authenticated users. So this is one gotcha with group policy we'll talk about in the next video, and that is, what are we going to do when this thing gets away from us? How can we figure out what's happening? So again, you'll have to play with group policy. It will outthink you. I've done some consulting gigs with some very large corporations, and I've watched them wrestle for 6 or 8 months on getting their group policy settings correct, because again, they can't outthink you. So again, notice here, since we applied this particular group policy to authenticated users, let me go back in here and let's take a look at it. Since our default domain policy is applied to authenticated users, then that means that everybody got it. Okay, so in the next video we're going to talk about a couple other issues with group policy management. Now let's follow up from the previous video where we forced group policy to now let's try to determine, okay, how do I now troubleshoot group policy? One thing I can guarantee you, okay, actually two things. Group policy will do some incredible things on your network. Okay, that's guarantee number one. Guarantee number two, group policy will get away from you at some point and you will be totally lost as to why your various computers are doing weird things on your network, and you have to go back and reconstruct, wait a minute, what's being applied where. The Microsoft suggestion is to not go over anywhere from 4 to 6 group policy objects that are being applied to any one computer or user. So that means that a lot of people will apply like a default domain policy, say one for a sales group, one for certain OU, and all sorts of things, maybe a site policy. So you have these policies piling on top of each other. Various ones will override one another. So again, have to think this through. But let's talk about this one. Okay, so I applied a group policy, and so now I notice on my administrator's machine I can't see the documents folder. And I'm wondering, now, what's going on? Now in my simple little example here, we've only got one group policy. We know exactly what it is, but how would we find this in the real world? Well, let's go to Administrative Tools and go to Group Policy Management. Okay, there is a tool in here called Group Policy Results. And what we can do with this tool is basically more or less replay group policy and have it track and tell us what all has been applied where. So the way I do this is right click on Group Policy Results and then choose Group Policy Results Wizard. And this takes me into the wizard. It's telling me that it helps me ascertain the policy settings for a specific user or computer. And so I'm going to hit next, and I'm going to do this computer. Now notice I could do another computer and browse and go out and search for the computers on my network. Okay, if I had a bunch of clients out there, I could go grab those. But I will just choose this computer. Hit next. And then I'll do it for the current user. Now keep in mind, user and computer are important here, and there's letting me know what I'm checking. So I'll click next, and it's now gathering policy statistics. It's basically replaying group policy as if I just logged in. Okay, it's generating a report. Notice the administrator on the Win QWEOHQCTEV machine. When I created a domain controller, and when I actually installed Windows Server, I allowed Windows Server to name this machine, and so I've got this bizarre name here. So anyway, forgive me for that. Look at, there's a summary here. If I can click Show All here, it gives me all kind of real cool information. The computer name, the domain, the site that I'm in, the last time group policy was processed. It was on today's date at 7:30 a.m. Now, which group policy objects have been applied to this user. Well, the default domain policy, the default domain, and the controller's policy, because I am a domain controller as well. So all three of these, and then the local group policy didn't get applied, and the reason is there's nothing in there. Now, security group memberships where this group policy was applied, notice there's all these people out here, okay, because they're part of the domain and so forth. No filters, the component status, everybody was successful. User configuration, see some more of that information. Notice applied, and this is on the user, and these up here I should have pointed out are on the computer. Now, let's go to what we really came for, the settings. Let's click on Show All, and for example, I'm trying to find out why I cannot see the documents choice on the Start menu. Notice we're enforcing password history, 24 passwords to remember. My maximum password age is 42 days. You can kind of see some of these. I won't read them all to you. Here's some Kerberos information. Come on down, user rights. I'm probably scrolling too fast for you, but you can go recreate this on your machine. Take a look. What I want to get to is down here at the very bottom under user configuration, we say, here's the policy. The default domain policy has set this, and it has removed the documents icon from the Start menu. Okay, I can click on this link, and it will try to get me some information. And hang on, Bill's trying to protect me from the bad guys out there. And notice it's saying, okay, this is what it does and how to change it and so forth. So I can get some help there, and I don't care about the scripts. So what I need to do now is just go out there and change that default domain policy to remove those documents. To put that documents button back. So this is the way that we're going to go out there and tell what's happened. We can get group policy results by running that results wizard and determining exactly what's happened. And again, you will get surprised on this. So keep in mind, this is a tool that you will use. Make sure you know where it is. And also, while we're on the subject, let me show you one more thing out there in the group policy management tool. And that is, there is a group policy modeling wizard out here that you can kick off that will help you start to lay out some of your group policy. And so you may want to take a look at that thing and play with it. But again, you want to get in a quiet room somewhere with a whiteboard and really start to think through your policy settings, who needs what, how you're going to implement them, and how they're going to stack up. Okay, so there's the easiest, best way to start troubleshooting group policy. Let's talk about what's new in group policy. Now, in different videos, I've shown you how to set up group policy, how to edit an object, how to troubleshoot group policy, how to force updates. Now let's kind of back up a little and talk about what does Windows Server 2008 do for group policy. What are the enhancements? So what's new in group policy? Let's back up just a second and let's talk about group policy in XP and in the Windows Server 2003 world. Now, prior to 2003 in the Windows Server 2000 environment is where we got group policy. We saw our first look at it, and it jumped a little bit in Server 2003. Well, by the time the Server 2003 XP world came around, there were approximately 1,700 settings that you could tweak in group policy. Now, in the Server 2003 environment, templates or all the settings for a group policy object was stored in what was called an ADM file. Now, of course, really what those things are doing is making registry changes. It's basically a holder for settings that are going to be made in the registry. Now, it was a great deal, but you need to understand that to understand what's changed in the Vista Server 2008 world. There have now been another 700 settings added, so we're up to 2,400 total. A lot of these have to do with security, things like wireless and some other things. And so you now have 2,400 total settings. Now, if you really want to be a really savvy administrator who really uses group policy to the max, I can't recommend strongly enough that you get out on Microsoft's website, you download some of their white papers, and also you probably want to go grab some of the third-party books that are out there that you'll see in the bookstores and on Amazon and some other places. There are some really good group policy books, and if this is your responsibility, I would strongly suggest you take a look. With 2,400 items, there's a lot of really cool things you can do to secure, not only secure your network, but to help user issues and really cut down on those trouble calls. If a user doesn't need to see a functionality, let's take it away from them. And then if they can never see it, they can't accidentally change things. Now, let's go back to the way the templates are stored. In the old 2003 XP world, they were stored in ADM files. They're now stored in ADMX files, and this is, here's that word again, the XML format. And this gives it a lot of things, but the big one is the templates can now be read from an XML file that basically works out to be like a central data store. So it's faster, it's more efficient, and here's the big one. Since it's XML, we're averaging per GPO file, or per ADM file, if you will. The ADMX files are an average of 4 megabytes smaller. Now, if you've got 4, ADM files at 4 megabytes, it's 16 megs, and that translates into much less replication traffic between your domain controllers on your Active Directory network. Okay, so big news there in group policy. Now, the group policy now runs in Windows Server 2008 as its own separate service. Now, this adds some stability and some control, and if you actually just want to kill group policy, if you've made a change to group policy and suddenly everything's blown up, you now have more or less a nuclear option, and that is to basically just go in and shut down the group policy service, and no group policy is applied anywhere. Okay, it's a drastic measure, but you can do that now. The next thing, and this is a totally new idea, because group policy was designed to lock down the network, to lock down the user environment, and to give us consistent settings across entire domains, organizational units, groups, and so forth. With that, obviously, predictably, came problems. Hey, wait a minute. I'm in the sales OU. I'm in the accounting group or marketing group or whatever, and just a few of us down here need to be able to make this particular change on our computer. Okay, what that usually led to was additional group policy objects having to be built and applied, and people separated out into different groups and so forth. What we have now, new in Server 2008, is what's called group policy preferences. And preferences allow the user to select some of their own settings. So it will enforce a group policy, but it'll allow user to select their own settings. All I'm going to tell you about this is go out and read about group policy preferences, play with them in a test environment, get to know them, and you can use these things. Now, right quick, let me go show you where you find these things, and just a real quick overview of what they look like. So to see these things, let's jump out to the Group Policy Management tool, and you may have noticed them in some other videos, but if I go into my domain and I look at some of my group policy objects, if I edit a group policy object, you will now notice we have policies, but we also have preferences. And if I expand preferences, you can see, for example, Windows control settings, say power options. We can go in and set some new power options or power schemes, and we can make these things available for users to adjust individually. So anyway, just go play with these things, get familiar with them, and do some reading on them, but it gives you a little bit more flexibility with group policy.